Alright then guys, here's another Just a Thought video, the first one being that of a movie review, if you will. Now, for the sake of this movie, I won't give out any spoilers, but I did just go and see Detective Pikachu, and I mean, if I wasn't a Pokemon fan before, I am more so than most, but just to give you kind of a brief history, my length in terms of Pokemon kind of stopped after Platinum, and I'll actually give like a little brief history of Pokemon in another video if you like, but I want to go ahead and talk about Detective Pikachu. So keep in mind, I stopped at the 4th generation of Pokemon, so my knowledge of other Pokemon that was featured in this film may be a little bit lacking, but I recognize the majority of them, except for like maybe one. That's about the only Pokemon that I did not recognize. The rest of them, I knew right off the back. I know what that one is, I know what that one is, I know what gen that one is, you know, that type of thing. So it's like, if you are a big Pokemon fan, you'll realize like the first 10 to 20 minutes of the film, you're going to be like naming off each individual Pokemon right off the back. Like literally as soon as you start the film, aside from like 2 big featured Pokemons, the other smaller Pokemons, which to the naked eye, to like any normal person, I say normal person if they're not a Pokemon fan, they look like regular animals. But to the keen eye, you'll recognize certain Pokemons, and you'll be like immediately analyzing that thing, and it's like they did it, they did it, you know. It's one of those like key features in that Pokemon trait look, and it's like as soon as you see it, you lose your mind at the ideal thought that you're now watching a live action Pokemon movie. Like that's the mind-blowing part, is that we finally have a live action Pokemon film. And you know, the trailers show a lot of different Pokemon, okay? There's no denying that. It shows a lot of different Pokemon. But there's so many more that's in the film that really the trailer couldn't really let you analyze, you know? There's so many different ones, and all of them just look so absolutely amazing to look at. Like, the biggest thing that I've heard people talk about is that this is a big eye-candy movie. And yes, it is an eye-candy movie, but if you are a Pokemon fan and you have a keen interest to detail, attention to detail and all that stuff, this movie does it spot on. Like, the thing that I get the most is that some people complain about how some of the Pokemon look. I know I have a friend of mine who actually did complain a little bit about some of the Pokemon. And, you know, my first opinion, my only complaint in terms of Pokemon was A-Pump. And after watching the movie, all of a sudden that kind of disappeared, you know? It's like I first saw the A-Pump, and I would tell you, but I don't want to spoil anything. But to kind of give you an idea, I thought A-Pump was like one thing, but the reality is that was something else that was causing it to happen. So the reality is the actual look of A-Pump actually looks way better. So it's like, you know what, this is actually better than I thought it was going to be. I actually thought this was going to be like the one Pokemon that I can't really get around with, but in all honesty, it worked out pretty well. You know, some of the other Pokemons, like for example, Mr. Mime, Charizard for that matter, you know, some people may have had some complaints, but in all honesty, the other Pokemon look absolutely amazing, phenomenal even. I was just like mind blown at the fact that, holy crap, I'm looking at a live action Pokemon and it looks beautiful. Okay, I was hypnotized by it, and I guess it's easy for me to have that happen to me, but in all honesty, you know, they could have easily screwed this up. They could have easily screwed this up, like one other corporation that messed up Sonic really badly, and now they're having to push the movie just to redo Sonic, which I still don't get that. I really don't, but that's side of the point. This movie does an amazing job when it comes to making the attention to detail to every single Pokemon. Every single one of them is perfect, to me anyway. To me, they are exactly how I envisioned them to be in real life as real life Pokemon, you know? Like, this is how I thought they would look like in real life. So, they do an amazing job, what they do. They do an absolutely phenomenal job with how they look. And the biggest thing that I caught, Arlo, for those that don't know, he did a movie review of Pokemon movie, and the one thing that he said, which got me really hyped, is that they could have left it as just a eye candy Pokemon movie and be done with it, you know? But they went the extra mile and analyzed each individual Pokemon, each of their traits, what they're known for, what they're good with, their techniques, their ability. They analyze all of it. Instead of going with the default of like, use Thundershock or Flamethrower, no, they actually went beyond that. You know, they've analyzed every technique that a Pokemon can use and implemented it towards this film. And that's the mind-blowing part, you know? They could have just made it anything, but instead they've analyzed it perfectly. And again, I don't want to spoil it because that's the best part about this film, is that they incorporate everything. And there's like a key Pokemon that I would tell you, but again, they make references of every Pokemon and their key details. And if you're a fan of Pokemon and you know a little bit about each Pokemon's hidden lore and stuff through the Pokedex and stuff, it's reflected in this film almost. Almost every Pokemon and their lore is related, and it is spot on. I was like, my gosh, they did it. They actually made a good video game blockbuster movie. You know, it very rarely do you get that. And I say you rarely get that because most of the times when it comes to video game movies, that is made strictly from Hollywood. Okay? That's the specific term that I'm using. Specifically from Hollywood itself. They usually don't get it right. They don't usually get it right. I can only name of like 2 films, or 3 if you want to count it technically, that are actually correct, but that's only because they were made from the studio itself. For example, there's Ratchet & Clank that came out recently, some time ago. There's Kingsglaive, Final Fantasy 15 Kingsglaive, and then Final Fantasy 7 Advent Children that came out years ago. So it's one of those things where it's like, unless it came out of the studio directly, any other video game adaptation movie, unfortunately, kind of sucks. You know, that's the unfortunate thing, and unfortunately, it's looking that way for Sonic. But in Detective Pikachu's case, this one does an amazing job. It's not just a perfect film for kids, which I'll get into that in just a sec, but it's a perfect film for kids, adults, fans of Pokemon, casual or hardcore, strictly from the anime, strictly from the games, you name it. If you are a Pokemon fanatic of some kind, this will get your attention real quickly, and it is amazing of how they do it. You know, it's amazing how well they do the film. And, you know, that's the beauty of it. You know, the overall look is spot on to how they need to do it. You know, really, it is spot on. But now we go into, aside from the main film itself, which is the beauty of Pokemon, let's go into the nitty-gritty part of it all, you know, like story and everything like that. Now, the biggest thing that I hear people talk about is that the story tends to kind of jitter itself a little bit. It doesn't focus too much on the detective part, which I would argue that's not necessarily the case. I don't know what they thought whenever they think of detectives and stuff like that. Keep in mind, these are, when you look at the film, these are just essentially non-detective people. The only detective part is Pikachu, and unfortunately, he's not good at it. and I'll explain that part if I can avoid any spoilers. But it's one of those things where it's like, they're not doing a fine job of detecting, and that's why people are thinking there's not enough detective work in it. The reality is that they're just not familiar with detectives. They're kind of slowly getting into that investigation ideal part, but that's why it seems like there's not enough detectiving in the film. It's because they're just nuances. They're just people who have never done detectiving in a professional stance. So it's one of those things where it's like, I don't think people get it. You know, the film is looking at it as like, these aren't actually professional detectives. It's like, yes, the guy's, the main character's father, and then the main character's owner, Pikachu and the kid, The guy, he's a professional detective. And yes, while these two are more or less connected to this one, they're not actually professional detectives in that sense of the realm, you know. So it's like, I don't see where their thoughts were in terms of detective-ing. It should be more of like the placement of how the story can be progressed, you know. They want to have time to take care of the characters that are in the film, to analyze it, to make certain that the Pokemon blend in with the movie instead of just being thrown out there just for eye candy sakes. They want to make certain that it works perfectly in the film, and that's the thing you gotta be careful with, is the pacing of the film has to match with the overall layout of the surroundings. And especially in this case, you know, for any other detective movie, yes, you could argue with the fact that you gotta make certain that clues link together. In this case, you have an extra element, and that's the Pokemon aspect. You have to be careful what Pokemon you put into a live-action film and mix it up, instead of being like a traditional Pokemon type film, which is like the anime sake. This is a standalone film that's separated from the anime and the games itself. It takes references from both and puts them together in a nice blend, but this is a completely different, isolated Pokemon film entirely. So obviously, you have to be careful with how you put a film involving a different type of genre. You know, if you just made a detective film, that would be one thing. But this is Pokemon we're talking about, so you're adding Pokemon into the scene, and so you have to be careful what you choose. You know, it's not a matter of like, oh yeah, we'll just throw in flippin' Ho-Oh into the mix and see what happens. No, they have to specifically pick certain Pokemon that will actually generally work, and that's where the actual detectiving part comes into play. And that's where you gotta be careful with it. So I don't know where people think when it comes to detective work, you know, and especially when it comes to these guys. So, and there's another thing too, is that the people that are acting aren't doing a good job. And I'm looking at this and I'm like, where are their minds at? You know, that's what I don't get. Is that, were they expecting a opera scene moment or something? I don't quite get what their level of acting is, but personally I didn't see any problems. Now again, it could be because the Pokemon caught my eye attention, stuff like that, and I was distracted. But in my personal opinion, the acting never falls short of what should be considered in this movie. Like, the acting was never off, I thought. The acting, I thought, was really good. And especially when you consider the fact that the majority of the characters that are in this film are essentially CG'd in. Okay? Let's take that into consideration. When you've got like a movie that is highly CG'd into a film, you have to consider that the actor has to act like as though as if the object's there. You know, whether it's like a stand of like a green type looking weird thing, or like a weird green plush or something, and then they replace it with an actual Pokemon and stuff like that. And so that takes a lot of work. And so to add on the massive amount of CG that has to be put into play, you also have the fact that these people are having to act like actual people, you know. So in all honesty, I don't see where they get the whole acting was a little off type thing. I think, in my personal opinion, the acting was really good in this one. So, I've been defending this film, but there is one problem that I have with the film. One, depending on who you are, one major problem. The rating. It says PG. Now, you can argue with the fact that yes, PG is a good rating, but here's the thing, I'm not arguing with the fact that it should be a G. No. It needs to be a PG-13. Now, there's a reason why I say that, because towards the beginning of the film, the first half anyway, whenever you first encounter Pikachu, there's going to be a little bit of swearing, okay? That's the thing that blew my mind, was that there was actual swearing. Now, obviously, either because there was too much going on for people to get the attention, but I heard Pikachu says OG like 3 times and then OH once, okay? Now, obviously, I'm abbreviating, but you get the idea. You know what it means. Now, it's one thing if he says, oh, my tail, or, oh, Pikachu, or something like that. That would be one thing. But he actually literally says them. And it's like one of those things I'm like, did no one catch that part? Yes, that may be the only thing. And like I said, you only hear it like 4 different times. But it's like a big thing that I'm like, it should be at least PG-13. You know what I mean? You can't get away with a film like that, you know? Even if it is Pokemon, okay? You can argue with the fact that, oh, it's Pokemon, you know? It's Nintendo. Nintendo would never... Yes, but if you're gonna put a little bit of cursing in it, buff that up to where parents will know that, oh, this may be something that I need to watch my kid over before letting him see it by himself and stuff like that, you know? Not to say that there's any gore or anything like that. No, there's not. It's just... It kind of slipped that in. Like, it kind of slipped, you know? I don't know if it was an accidental thing and he just kind of slipped out of the mouth and stuff. It may be that, but like I said, I was just like, wow, did they not catch that? If they didn't catch that, someone needs to. Again, you only hear it 4 times, so it's not like a major issue, or at least to my stance. But when you're looking at the fact that kids are going to be watching this, okay? It's a Pokemon film, so naturally kids are going to be watching this. So, wouldn't it be surprising if some of the kids learned a few new words? And I'm not talking about Pokemon names. No. Oh, boy. But from that aspect, there's another aspect that should be counted of, and that's the music. The music, I feel like, was on par perfect. Now, if you're a Pokemon fan, you're going to have chills listening to this film, okay? Because if you are keen to it, you can catch a few little Pokemon themes that was redubbed for this movie specifically. Like, you have the regular theme, but then you have, like, 1 or 2 other smaller, different pieces of music from Pokemon games in general. In which case, your ear will kind of pick up at that. It's like, is that what I think it is? You know, it's one of those things where it's like, it sounds almost like another theme in previous Pokemon games, but they redub it, reorchestrate it to work in this film, and it works really, really well. The other music is really, really good. Okay, like, it's really, really good. Now, oh man, there's so much that I want to talk about this film, of how well they've done it and stuff like that. But again, there's so much detail, but then there's so much spoiler that I cannot give away. But I will kind of give like a little, not a heavy, but a little like science thing, if you will. So in this film, like in the middle of the film, they go a little bit sciencey with Pokemon and stuff like that. And it kind of coexists with some of the Pokemon games. And not to a point where it's heavy. You know, most of the scientific discovery that they talk about is mostly like legendary Pokemon or fossilized Pokemon. In this movie, they talk about the next phase of like evolution and stuff. And so you're thinking, oh, well, you mean like altering Pokemon genetics and stuff like that? And sure enough, they actually go that direction. But then it goes into a completely major direction. One that's like completely messed up, okay? And again, I can't give this part out away, but it messes with you, what it does. It will mess with you. It's one of those things where it's like, what? And it's a very nice turnaround. It's one of those cliche moments, yes, admittedly, you know, you think it's one person, but in reality, it's a complete turnaround. But the way it showcases it is pretty interesting, and it's pretty fascinating to watch. And overall, if there was heavy complaints about the film, I would argue with the fact that none of that really matters. Because if you are a major fan of Pokemon, or if you're a casual fan, you used to watch Pokemon as a kid and you kind of grow out of it, or you're just a new fan of the Pokemon series and all that stuff, this film will target you. This film will be an amazing film, an amazing experience to go watch, and I highly recommend that you go see it. Now, there is one other thing that, on the one hand, gets me excited, but on the other hand, it gets me worried. And that's the fact that they've confirmed that they're going to be working on a sequel to the movie. There's word going around. It's not an official statement, but it's a rumor that's going around that just recently came up after the movie launch. They said that they're working on a sequel. And I'm just like, how can you do that? You know, it's like, how can you make a sequel out of this, you know? I won't argue about wanting one, you know, but maybe not specifically Detective Pikachu, if you will, you know. Another live-action Pokemon film, yes, most definitely. But a Detective Pikachu sequel specifically, I don't think it can work. I mean, they might be able to pull it off, and obviously because Pikachu is a main icon of Pokemon for 20 years now, 20 plus years, should I say, it only makes sense to do it that way, but I feel like, as big as Pokemon is, I feel like the film itself can succeed just by the Pokemon staple itself. I don't think you have to have Pikachu in every aspect of things. I feel like you need to kind of change it up every once in a while, you know. There are other story elements in Pokemon that you can implement into the film itself. There are other ways that you can do it, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a Detective Pikachu. It can be something interesting, you know. Some people have actually thought about like a Team Rocket story, which again would be very interesting to see, you know, a major corporation organization type Team Rocket film. That would be interesting to see. Personally, I would like to see like a Pokemon Snap movie type thing. You know, like this photographer is trying to capture a picture of a legendary Pokemon that he swears up and down he actually saw, and people don't believe him. So he's out looking for this legendary Pokemon specifically. And, you know, he encounters a lot of different Pokemon, a lot of different people and stuff like that. And there's like obviously an evil organization that's trying to capture said legendary Pokemon. But it could work. My brother Delmar came up with this one, and this one, it could work. It could work depending on the fan base, obviously. A documentary of a Pokemon film. A documentary. Not like behind the scenes of the Pokemon films, but more of like the nature documentary films. Like, get the original voice actor that does the animation of the narration of Pokemon and put it into a documentary Pokemon film, you know. That would be something that I think would be interesting to watch, you know, because they've done like little Pokemon shorts where it's just strictly the Pokemon. There's no people, it's just the Pokemon themselves. Admittedly, yes, that would get annoying for some people, but depending on the other people, they may enjoy it just a little bit better. In fact, it'd be a little bit interesting to watch, regardless. He also said that he would like to see a live-action Biju Brothers movie. And I'm like, the Biju Brothers has always been like a cartoon shorts for Pokemon, you know. So to put a whole like hour and 30 minutes worth of a film with the Biju Brothers would be a little bit of a stretch. Unless you include a talking Pokemon like Meowth, obviously. It could potentially work. You know, you need something to kind of liven up from the actual Pokemon statements themselves, since they only say their name. They talk in creature talk and stuff like that. You need at least one talking animal to kind of help with the overall translation of things. And at least a little bit of people interaction, or otherwise it's just not going to work. Now, there is another theory that could work, and depending on how you look at it, they might actually incorporate like a hidden language talk to where, yes, in people view, they can only hear the Pokemon speak their normal language. But in like the Pokemon view, they have different voices that communicate between other Pokemon and stuff. I think that would be pretty interesting if they did it that direction. Sort of like how Homeward Bound or like Ratatouille was, where only other creatures could hear other creatures talk, but the people can't understand what they're saying, obviously. That would be pretty interesting in that display of element, if you will. Now, another person thought about a Professor Oak story. You know, we don't really know much in terms of origins of Professor Oak. And that would be pretty interesting Except, while yes, he is like a main aspect to the Pokemon series since the dawn of Pokemon itself, he's not always there in every generation. Yeah, he's always kind of referenced, but he's not always there. So it's like, I don't think a Professor Oak movie would be perfect. Maybe a Professor movie type thing, or like a Pokemon Professional or something like that. That would be interesting. But again, if they're going to do a sequel to a live-action Pokemon film, I would like to see a different story being played out. I don't like the idea of a Detective Pikachu sequel specifically. You know, that to me, I feel like if you just do a sequel of Detective Pikachu, you might miss the mark a little bit. You know, you might miss the potential of like using other Pokemons in order to make the film more interesting to everyone else, you know. And like I said, this film does an amazing job with the Pokemon and the details that goes with them. They do an amazing job with it. And I want the studio to be encouraged to go in this direction of filmmaking. You know, if you're going to do a video game adaptation film, you have to do your research. You have to know what makes the video game character the character that people recognize. You know, don't make it like as though as if a real life thing. Make it like as though as if it popped out of the video game in real life. And if you do it that way, that's where everything works. You know, the lore, the story, the detailing of the creatures themselves, that's what delivers in this film. And so, I think Pokemon Detective Pikachu did a fantastic job of displaying what it needed to do. I think it did an amazing job. So, if you had plans to go see Detective Pikachu, go see it right now. Don't hesitate, go see it. If you had doubts, don't worry about them. You know, you're going to enjoy it regardless, okay? Even if some people or someone else kind of complained about the fact that, oh, it seems a little dull or anything like that, in actuality, you will actually more than likely enjoy it a little bit more than what they probably did. They're looking at it as like a professional sense. Obviously, they've watched more films than they should. And I say that because some people make a living off of watching films, and they watch too many of them to where I feel like it's kind of dulled their senses of the media itself, you know. Filming is a sense of entertainment, and if they're not entertained, obviously they're going to be very critical about it. But if they're entertained, they're going to be too distracted over, like, the nitty-gritty of the detail. And I think Pokemon does a very good job of entertaining the individual. And if you love Pokemon, you will be entertained. You will have a good time watching this film. You will enjoy it, I promise. But anyway, I've ranted or bragged about this film long enough. Let me know in the comments below. Have you seen Detective Pikachu? What are your thoughts about the films? You know mine. Mine are absolutely upscaled, and I absolutely love it. So, there you go. But thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care, guys.